slept in this morning and woke up feeling exhausted. This was only made worse by news that troops have been deployed to Portland, Oregon over domestic terrorism. WTF. Here, I thought I would give my tracker a day off, but I guess authoritarians never rest. I guess that means neither do I. So, here is our authoritarian risk tracker as of today, Saturday, September 25th, 2025. Our authoritarian risk in the United States is holding at 83 out of 100, which is solidly in the high zone and edging towards critical. Right now, I'm going to give you a breakdown of the most impactful events from this week that have led to the current scores in the individual areas that we're going to discuss. The Trump administration has ordered U.S. troops deployed to Portland, citing domestic terrorism and invoking a sweepingly broad authority, as reported by the Washington Post. The Guardian reported Trump publicly demanded Microsoft fire its lawyer who oversaw investigations into the 2020 election. This signals pressure on private and corporate institutions who are being pushed around by our president. The Wall Street Journal reported that the Justice Department is preparing probes into Soros-funded NGOs, suggests there's ongoing targeting of dissent or ideological opponents. On top of the very questionable indictment of James Comey after Trump calling to Pam Bondi via Truth Social, naming the people he wanted brought to justice who were at some point investigating him. James Comey was in charge of the investigation having to do with his relationship with Russia, which Trump calls the Russia hoax, which is actually not a hoax. With all these indictments being thrown around and more to come, it gives a rank whiff of vindictive prosecution. Unless the judiciary completely gives up and capitulates to the Trump regime. I'm holding on to hope that they stand fast and largely dismiss the indictment that was brought by a lawyer that Trump just hired who has no court experience. In other news, the shooting at an ICE detention facility in Dallas earlier this week killed one detainee and injured others, elevating tensions around immigration enforcement. This, according to AP News. Not to mention the rhetoric that came immediately following this event from J.D. Vance and others who immediately turned to propaganda instead of actually reporting the news, which would not give out any details of bullets in an ongoing investigation, because this does interfere with the legitimacy of investigation that could easily be dismissed by disinformation. Although I think in this case they felt it would be appropriate given that the man who executed this attack also ended his own life. Additionally, a young Latino serviceman who is a citizen earlier in the last couple of months was kidnapped by ICE and kept for days. He continues to speak out to bring light to ICE's brutality and abuse of power. We hope that this will also come to head, even though in California, the folks who brought the court cases to racial profiling and to ICE's brutal tactics were disregarded basically by Supreme Court, which again impacts the trust of the judiciary to not capitulate to political agendas. So Trump's administration has escalated attacks on media outlets and figures that are critical of him. I think it's Lisa Cook and the judge in charge of his fraud case in New York, in which Trump is not allowed to have any real estate or business in the state of New York because of how bad he has defrauded people and businesses in the city of New York, I believe. So this is reported by AP News. Jimmy Kimmel aired on Tuesday after he was apparently dropped for ratings reasons. We later found out from Trump in his Truth Social that this was intentional because of Trump's dislike for Jimmy Kimmel, criticizing him. The misinformation or disinformation that he is spreading is that this has been critical to Charlie Kirk, and this is not the case. In fact, Jimmy Kimmel's topic around Charlie Kirk wasn't about him, it was about the president, who is passionate about his relationship with Charlie Kirk. When asked how he was doing the next day, completely moved on and said, "Oh, I'm great, and let's talk about the ballroom that I'm building." And so, seeing that this was completely tone deaf, I believe, in mourning the death of someone that he claimed to be close friends with, this is something that, in fact, President Trump did not like and was the reasoning for going on the offensive. This, in all actualities, also had to do with ABC and some of their local media broadcasters that were trying to initiate a merger within the FCC, and the FCC used Kimmel's talk as a reason to demand for Jimmy Kimmel's exit in order for them to be approved for their FCC merger. The further implication here is in our First Amendment right of free speech, which gives the okay to say things that are critical of a political figure, critical of the president, without repercussions or penalties that further prevent any silence. This is also the same First Amendment that protected Charlie Kirk in the speech and the propaganda he discussed in his debates. Positive or negative, this protects all of us to speak. The limitation comes if I were to call an immediate action in a violent way, that would be regulated and an exception by the First Amendment. If looking on social media and other outlets of anything outside of legacy media, where you have people of color who are continuing to speak out against censorship and First Amendment rights, in calling attention to the hypocrisy of Jimmy Kimmel allowing his voice to return to the media, to ABC, when other people of color are continuing to this idea of censorship from speaking things and speaking of events that are true to their own experiences and ultimately being silenced. The Pentagon instituted stricter controls on its personnel's public speaking and participation in think tank events, limiting external public discourse, according to Politico. Other reports from non-legacy news sources are reporting that all news coming from the White House must pass a type of purity test and get approval from the Department of Warmonger, only allowing access to media sources that have pledged allegiance to the president rather than to do their journalistic duty to report the truth. Lastly, under Project 2025, many of the executive actions already align with its authoritarian blueprint. This includes the centralization of power, weakening oversight, and regulatory overreach. This has been reported by the Fulcrum. We also see in news media about the mass firing of federal workers that continue to generate legal battles, with courts ruling some terminations unlawful, illustrating tensions in administrative capacity and norm enforcement. Additionally, the white supremacist rally, also known as the Memorial to Charlie Kirk, have given license to white Christian nationalists and the platform it wanted in order to go full speed ahead into its 2025 plague book. And now that you've known more about this week's events, let me go ahead and break down the scores for you. Again, this is Kat, and welcome to Cat Watch.
I thought it would be helpful to review the scaling system that ChatGPT and I created. This scale assesses democratic norms, institutional functioning, and civil liberties against events that have taken place over the week. I check the authoritarian risk weekly since each day brings updates from all three branches of government and of course bully man baby Donald Trump's intimidation tactics through his Truth Social.
On this slide, executive overreach is at a 94, which is critical, and with checks and balances at 86, which is also critical. Executive power grabs are accelerated. New federal actions override state authority, bypassing normal channels, and this erodes the guardrails that are meant to keep checks and balances intact. As we move on to civil liberties, protest rights, and surveillance, the current risk is set at 95. For civil liberties, protest rights are at a 92, and surveillance comes in at an 88, which are all critical. Protest crackdowns and expanded surveillance continues. Organizers face escalating penalties while monitoring of both citizens and journalists, deepening this chilling effect on dissent. Foreign interference, disinformation, and propaganda. Foreign interference and disinformation fall into a risk score of 91, which again is critical. Legacy media is also choosing to highlight stories that fit a specific narrative, choosing to disregard legal casework and or changes within our country, especially in regards to the two young black males that were found hung in their universities and were quickly deemed as a suicide, even when there was evidence to the contrary, making this at least suspicious, along with other reportings of resegregating areas and spaces within the Deep South that caught no attention whatsoever. So being able to have multiple sources for media is critical in order to develop an informed opinion about what is going on in our world. Additionally, we still have bots. These networks are linked to Russia and China, and they amplify violent rhetoric, fueling unrest. State-aligned propaganda is the legacy media that chooses to report and not report based on a narrative that supports President Trump and his regime. And the one who really stands out the most for this is Fox News, which takes the point of view of the president's administration and echoes the rhetoric that he gives and other aggressive perspectives of the white Christian nationalist movement. All of this disinformation and propaganda, along with other alternative news sources that give a very broad area of news and information, is continuing to weaken trust in U.S. institutions. We don't necessarily live in a society that says Fox News, racist, Fox News, elitist, Fox News, this and that. There's no source of objectivity in recognizing other than listening to other news sources to determine as to what level of journalistic bias are coming from these news sources. Legacy media is largely supported by wealthy people who have a specific agenda in keeping themselves rich. And so this in and of itself will give a priority to certain news reports over others without any sort of central regulation or even identification. You go to a movie theater and movies are rated with a specific rating. There's nothing of that in the United States when it comes to news sources. A lot of the rhetoric and information that we get, we have no idea as to whether or not this is something that is actually based in fact and based in truth. One of the news sources that I use is Ground News, which really gives us a good idea of a balance of news and media reports assessed for political meaning and factuality. Finding a way of discerning your way through the news media and media companies that may or may not be giving you the complete package of information is important, because we don't know unless we look outwards into news sources whether something is factual. Moving on to political violence and militarization. Political violence is at a 92, and law enforcement militarization is at 89, and are both at a critical level. Political violence is surging. The killing of Charlie Kirk escalated tensions, while armed groups increasingly blur the line between political activity and paramilitary action. We see that an increased number of episodes of violence being enacted in this country are increasing exponentially. So press freedom and judicial independence. Press freedom is at a critical level of 88, and judicial independence is at an 82, which is borderlining on critical. And all of this is in the face of upcoming court cases that are being brought. If there is a continued dismantling of law within the judicial independence is in some ways keeping us grounded out of full authoritarianism, and we can hope that this continues to stay strong in upholding the rule of law. So while some of the courts have checked the executive power, ongoing loyalty testing and attacks on judges have eroded confidence. In fact, there was a meeting of many of the judges who brought together, who were and gathered together, were wanting to bring to attention that the increase of threats and violence to them and their families has increased because of the very hateful rhetoric coming from the executive administration. Now, as we move into public trust, state resistance, and election integrity, public trust is at a 92, which is critical. State pushback and elections is at a 78, which is high. Public trust remains fragile, though state level resistance has slowed some of this overreach. At this point in time, there is not a lot of trust, especially into members of Congress and their ability to stand up against the executive administration. These executive orders and such that are coming to pass, the head of Congress gave everybody a break up until Tuesday simply for the reason that they have now elected the 218th person that can now force a vote and subsequently release of the Epstein files, which is very curious that this happened this past week, and ultimately today's invasion of Portland is now being enacted. I theorize that this is all being done to distract from what was reported on Friday and Thursday. People who have supported directly Trump's agenda and Steve Bannon, who is one of his closest confidants in his push for his presidency, in addition to Elon Musk, were all found in paperwork coming from Epstein to be in meetings with Epstein and to be visiting his island. And so this comes in showing that the walls are closing in faster and faster onto the president, bringing to light some of his closer affiliations and friendships, and even kind of criticizes even more his vow to protect people that have a vested interest in this information being kept silent. Our election systems are under strain with new legal challenges and disinformation undermining legitimacy. In this arena as well, we've seen that lawsuits are now being filed from Pam Bondi to the states that are refusing to give information about our voting in our recent elections. An expert in the area of like cybersecurity and information systems is pointing out that there is perhaps a flaw in the election processing of our voting systems that we're using that might be granting favor towards and or leanings towards a specific party, which in this case was President Trump. If the federal government was given our names and information in addition to what we have chosen to vote for, this gives Trump and his administration even more standing come election day. People will be even more heavily regulated in being allowed to or not allowed to put their vote in on those days. And even the governor in Chicago, Illinois, and Gavin Newsom, in all of his flaws, are saying that the whole idea of this information is designed to has already been tested in the sense of allowing for the National Guard to be overridden and sent into guard federal buildings and to interfere and to totally disregard the will of the state, that this was just a test run for our upcoming election days that are going to create further conflict and barriers to voting. And so this information should be something that is not given to our federal government to tabulate votes and such, is something that is given strictly to the states in order to run the elections for their state and to run for the federal government. And by Trump wanting to now have a hand in these is also giving a lot of concern about his repeating of wanting to give himself an advantage in the upcoming elections to put more value in people who are going to support his regime as opposed to bring dissent, which has already happened in Arizona with the new Congress member who is being stalled from being sworn into office in Congress simply for no other reason other than she is someone who is going to vote to have this release of the Epstein files means of accessing this documentation. The question again comes into what is Trump really hiding that he is trying to fight tooth and nail to keep out of the hands of the public? That is something that's very interesting. I can't make heads or tails with all of this. I know that Trump is a convicted or an educated sexual predator. The surprising idea of him being in the Epstein files, no, it's not a surprise. Am I saying he's absolutely in there? No. We don't know. The idea that Steve Bannon and Elon Musk and Peter Thiel, who are people very much in the MAGA sphere, being affiliated with this does create a lot more unrest and dissension when it comes to even MAGA itself. So, to review the events from this week that impacted the scores, we had intensified federal crackdowns, violent rhetoric is amplified by bots, and trade instability is fueled by new tariff threats. All of these events drove the risk levels higher. Since July, the risk for overall authoritarianism is rising to a more quickly than it did even in July, and that's very scary. So in the upcoming week, what's next? What are the things to watch out for? Watch for the fallout of economic shocks, heightened security measures around protests, and coordinated disinformation campaigns ahead of upcoming court rulings and election deadlines. Legal filings and injunctions hopefully are already set in place against troop deployments U.S. soil. This could moderate these risks if the courts act quickly. And so something to continue to watch would be on the Washington Post and also on Associated Press coverage. And so these are all things to be on the lookout. And so the other part is, what are other federal responses to the Dallas ICE attack? I think today's events are another response in addition to the memorial. This is, again, fueling more disinformation and rhetoric coming from the executive branch before any real investigation has taken place to automatically throw into the leftists or liberals or whatever the case is without having any sort of information about the actual situation. And so this really stirs a lot of mistrust, especially from me, if anything that comes from not only the Department of Justice, but the FBI, who are, for me, a total mockery of what they used to be. Even CIA operatives who have left in droves against, in not wanting to support this current government, has now left us vulnerable to not only the internal conflicts and the unrest that's occurring within our government, we also have the foreign interests and foreign risks of influence, and makes us completely vulnerable to other countries that are seeking to do harm. The stirring of unrest into political violence is exactly what they want. They want to take advantage of the United States that's broken apart, not unified, and fighting each other in order to take over us. We're not doing anything on that front, and our federal government is not keeping us protected from foreign interference. And the idea that Trump is his involvement into Putin slash Zelensky, this war that's going on between them, and also NATO, is simply for gaining money, selling of weapons and military technology in order to continue the fight. This is very, very sad for our country who seems to be in this total grifting of the world and us, the people in this country. And it really makes me very sad that we are to this place in which, on top of those things, we have racial and ethnic tensions by a single voice in this country of white Christian nationalism. If we as Christians, as Catholic Christians, are not careful about what we are choosing to align ourselves to, we make the mistake of aligning ourselves to white Christian nationalism, which seeks ultimately to eliminate dissension of people of color. If we ourselves, as Catholic Christians, are not the voice of dissent, we might see ourselves falling victim to the federal government and losing our lives and losing our home in this country. And for white Christians, white Catholics, the same goes for us in the sense of you're going to see family members and friends having to leave this country because of your refusal to see that this was the agenda all along. I hope my white friends will see that and believe people who are trying to share their fears in this country for their families and friends and for themselves to be seen just as that, fears and experiences that you may not see because of the privilege you have to not see the experiences that we have. And an equivalent in this situation is the rate at which women are not believed when they experience sexual violence. They're torn down. What were you wearing? What were you doing? Why were you alone? All of these things question the female who is sexually assaulted and not the person who assaulted them. And then you have the ways that money influences the person who assaults. They have an education, they have a job, a bright future ahead of them, which gives these men power to continue to do what they do against women and women who are shamed for having experienced sexual assault. So before we try to dismiss and disregard the voices of people of color in this country, I really hope that you keep that in mind, that it is more common than it is not for us to be not believed. And it does not help our relationships and our safety in this country when people that we care about and people who say they care about us refuse to believe us. I'm bringing in a playlist of some videos that really give you a good amount of information into what are some directions that we can face and what are some really serious conversations that we need to start having in regards to our government and our responses and what to be prepared for. And with that, I'll see you next time. Thank you for watching. Please leave a comment, and if you like this video, like, share, and subscribe. I'll see you next time.